Let me tell you something strange about silence, especially in this digital age. We live in a time where everything breathes through a screen, where people share every flicker of their existence. Morning coffees, sunsets, laughter, heartbreaks, tears wrapped in captions, pain hidden behind filters. The world has become a theater of lives on display. And yet, in this constant noise of self-expression, there are some who remain invisible. They scroll quietly, observe deeply, and speak rarely. You might know someone like that. Maybe you are someone like that. And there's always this lingering question: why? Why would anyone choose to be unseen when everyone else is shouting for attention? It's easy to assume they're shy, introverted, or indifferent, but that's not the full story. Because beneath that silence, there's an entire psychology at play, a quiet resistance against a world that confuses noise with meaning. See, for some people, silence isn't emptiness, it's control. It's the sacred ability to decide what the world doesn't get to know. It's the art of protecting one's soul from being turned into content. Social media has subtly rewired how we define ourselves. It rewards exposure. It praises noise. And yet, the ones who remain in the shadows, they often see the clearest. They watch without interrupting. They think before reacting. They feel before responding. Psychologists have found something fascinating. Those who rarely post often show higher levels of self-restraint, emotional independence, and inner clarity. They are less swayed by comparison, less hungry for validation. They don't post to prove who they are. They live to understand it. And in a world drowning in performances, that's revolutionary. Because, let's be honest, most of what we post isn't communication. It's self-advertisement. It's identity construction. Every caption whispers, "This is who I am. Please approve." But when you stop posting, something changes. You stop living for the lens. You stop translating life into captions. You begin to experience moments again, fully, privately, freely. That's the hidden psychology of those who don't post. They're not against technology. They're searching for truth. They crave authenticity in a world of illusion. They're not hiding. They're protecting what's real. Because when you've seen how easily perception can be manipulated, you start treasuring what can't be posted. The raw, unfiltered, unrepeatable essence of life itself. For many, the silence comes after burnout. Maybe they once shared everything, until one day it stopped feeling real. Each post felt like a performance, a quiet competition with themselves. So they disappeared, not dramatically, just slowly, quietly, until the world forgot their voice. But silence doesn't mean emptiness. It doesn't mean they don't feel. In fact, it often means they feel too much. There's a concept in psychology called psychological ownership, the feeling that something belongs deeply to you. A memory, a thought, a private moment, and every time you post it, that ownership fades a little. It becomes public property, open to interpretation, to judgment, to distortion. So maybe they're not hiding, maybe they're guarding the purity of their moments, guarding their sense of self from being diluted by opinions. And maybe that's not loneliness. Maybe that's freedom. Because think about it. When was the last time you did something meaningful and didn't feel the urge to share it? When was the last time you just lived without thinking about how it would look online? That reflex to capture, to post, to display, it's not natural. It's conditioning. It's the dopamine loop of likes and hearts teaching our brains that validation equals worth. And those who step out of that loop, they're not disconnected. They're detoxed. They're healing. They cook without photographing. They travel without tagging. They feel without explaining. And in that quiet, something awakens, self-awareness without an audience. But silence isn't always peaceful. For some, it's born from fear of being misunderstood, judged, or ignored. Because social media created a subtle anxiety, the feeling that we're always performing, always watched, even when no one is looking. So they retreat, not from people, but from pressure. They want to be seen, just not by everyone. They want to be understood, not consumed. Ironically, those who speak the least often think the most, Their silence isn't absence, it's overflow. They are full of thoughts, of stories, of quiet storms. In a world that screams, "Look at me," choosing invisibility becomes a statement. It's saying, "I exist beyond your perception." They scroll through lives, they observe, they empathize. But they rarely project because they've learned something sacred. Not everything you experience is meant to be witnessed. Growth, grief, transformation, they happen quietly. And those who've lived through enough of them know that being unseen isn't insignificance. It's where identity is formed. That's the paradox. Social media was built to connect us, yet it often leaves us lonelier than before. When you stop posting, you stop chasing connection through pixels. You start building it through presence. You learn who checks in without updates, who remembers you without reminders, who loves you without proof. And that's the kind of connection that lasts. Because the ones who don't post, they live there, in the unshared, in the sacred ordinary. They let life unfold without turning it into performance. That's identity security, knowing who you are when no one's watching. When your peace isn't public, it's real. And often, these people, the quiet ones, have the most extraordinary stories to tell. But they tell them slowly, in person, over coffee, through silence, through eyes. Not for followers, but for connection. They don't seek applause, they seek understanding. They don't need the world to notice their existence. They're too busy living it. And maybe in this noisy world, their silence is the loudest truth. Because being unseen doesn't mean being forgotten. It means remembering yourself. The longer someone stays offline, the more they begin to see again. Colors look deeper. Conversations last longer. Time feels like time again. Because when you stop performing life, you start living it. There's a quiet beauty in walking through the world without needing proof that you were there. You're not thinking about filters or framing. You're inside the moment, and the science backs it too. Each like, each view, each notification triggers dopamine, the brain's reward chemical. That's why it feels addictive. And those who step away from that loop, they aren't bored, they're brave. That's not withdrawal, that's awakening. They rediscover joy without validation, worth without witnesses. It's called an internal locus of control, when your sense of happiness comes from within, not from attention. And people who nurture that, they live lighter, freer, truer. Because when your identity isn't reflected back through screens, it stops fragmenting. It becomes whole again. And maybe that's the rebellion we need, to stay whole in a world obsessed with fragments. But silence doesn't always come easy. It takes courage to disappear in a world that equates visibility with worth. To say, "I am enough, even when unseen." Because the truth is, the most meaningful things that happen to you will never be posted. Your growth, your heartbreaks, your quiet victories, your private joys, they exist in memory, not media. And maybe that's enough. Authentic self-expression isn't about exposure, it's about alignment. It's when who you are inside matches what the world sees, even if the world doesn't see it at all. And maybe that's what silence is, alignment without performance. Because those who live quietly, they live deeply. They notice the pauses, the light, the texture of moments others scroll past. They aren't detached, they're immersed. They feel life fully, not filtered through the need to share it. Their silence isn't mystery, it's mastery. The calm that comes when you no longer need to be understood by everyone. Because once something becomes public, it stops being purely yours. It belongs to the algorithm, to the audience, to the endless interpretations. But some things, the most sacred things, are meant to be kept. So the next time you see someone who never posts, don't assume they're hiding. Maybe they're just living. Maybe they've remembered something we've all forgotten, that being unseen doesn't mean being alone, that being quiet doesn't mean being empty, that sometimes the truest expression of who you are is silence. Because in the end, we are not meant to be performances. We are meant to be people, and those who don't post, they remind us of that. Every quiet, unfiltered, beautifully invisible moment.